faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally here with Book Talk. The book we're interpreting for you today is the Biography of Du Fu. On August 15th, 1945, Japan announced unconditional surrender. The news spread back to the rear areas, and people cheered with joy. The next day, the Chongqing Ta Kung Pao's front page headline began by quoting this poem. Suddenly, news came from beyond the Sword Pass that the northern provinces were recovered. At first, I couldn't hold back my tears, wetting my clothes. Then I turned to see my wife and children. Their sorrows vanished. I rolled up my books and poems, wild with joy. Singing in broad daylight, we must drink freely. With youth as our companion, it's good to return home. Immediately from Ba Gorge through Wool Gorge, then down to Shenyang towards Luoyang. The newspapers were snatched up instantly. People read these lines of poetry and couldn't help but shed tears. The arduous war of resistance against Japan had finally ended in victory, truly making everyone ecstatic.
Many people drank freely and sang songs, celebrating all night long.
Then they began packing their bags, preparing to return to their hometowns they had fled from for years. Well, the author of this poem is the Tang Dynasty poet Du Fu. In the spring of 763 AD, the 8-year-long An Lushan Rebellion ended. Overjoyed, Du Fu wrote this poem, hearing of the recovery of Henan and Hebei. Over 1100 years later, we can still evoke strong resonance in later generations. As a great poet, what kind of experiences did Du Fu actually have? Why are his works so charming? Why have they endured for 1,000 years without fading? Today, the book, The Biography of Du Fu, we're going to talk about will uncover this secret. Well, the authors of this book are contemporary humanities scholars and professors at Nanjing University. It's Mo Lifang and Tong Qiang. Professor Mo Lifang is an authority on contemporary Tang poetry research and a renowned Du Fu expert. Professor Tong Qiang is dedicated to the study of ancient Chinese art history. They have a deep understanding of Du Fu's poetic achievements. Their biography combines Du Fu's experiences and creations, gradually unfolding a life portrait of the sage of poetry. Next, I will divide Du Fu's life into 4 stages to narrate. Stage 1, Youth Period, the influence of family traditions and the zeitgeist. Stage 2, Chang'an Period, bidding farewell to youthful dreams and turning to realism. Stage 3, Refugee Period, pushing realist poetry to its peak. Stage 4, Late Life Period, artistic level reaching its zenith. Okay, now let's talk about the first stage, Youth Period, the influence of family traditions and the zeitgeist. In 712 AD, Du Fu was born in Gong County, which is today's Gongyi City in Henan Province. He lost his mother in childhood, and after his father remarried, he often served as an official away from home. So he sent Du Fu to Luoyang to be raised by his aunt. So Du Fu grew up in Luoyang, the secondary capital of the Tang Empire. He regarded this place as his hometown and was buried near Luoyang's Shouyang Mountain after his death. The Du family served as officials for generations. Although their official positions weren't high, and they were considered a humble family during the Tang Dynasty, they still enjoyed feudal privileges like tax exemption and exemption from labor service. The Du family traditions shaped Du Fu's life beliefs and guided him onto the literary path. 2 ancestors are particularly worth mentioning. First is Du Yu, Du Fu's 13th generation ancestor and a renowned minister of the Western Jin dynasty, who commanded the Jin army to eliminate Eastern Wu, making monumental contributions to the unification under the Jin dynasty. Du Yu was profoundly scholarly, diligently studying classical texts with particular expertise in the Zhou Zuan. Du Yu's collected commentaries on the Zhuo Zuan remains the earliest and most authoritative commentary, a classic work included in the 13 classics commentaries and sub-commentaries. And Du Yu's greatest legacy to the Du family was the tradition of upholding Confucianism while serving as officials, becoming officials according to Confucian principles. Du Fu deeply believed in this, Throughout his life, he held on to the ideal of assisting the emperor to surpass Yao and Shun, and restoring simple and honest customs, hoping to help the emperor become a wise ruler like Yao and Shun, to govern society so that people's customs remain pure and simple, with citizens living and working in contentment. Even during his most difficult times, Du Fu's convictions never wavered. In his own words, he dared not forget his roots. Another deeply influential ancestor was his grandfather, Du Shenyan. During Emperor Gaozong's reign, Du Shenyan, a Jinshi graduate, was renowned for his poetic mastery, especially in five-character regulated verse. His works featured precise parallelism, harmonious rhythms, and exquisite structure and diction, achieving remarkable artistic excellence. For example, in his masterpiece, In Response to Assistant Magistrate Liu of Jinling on an early spring excursion, the middle couplets, "Rosy clouds emerge from the sea at dawn. Plum and willow cross the river in spring. Warm air urges orioles to sing. Sunlight shifts on green duckweed." No wonder Du Xinyan was recognized during his lifetime as the founder of five-character regulated verse. With such a grandfather, Du Fu naturally felt immense pride. He proudly declared, "Poetry is our family's business," meaning verse writing was the family's hereditary craft. Du Shenyan's works, Du Fu treated them as model texts, reading and contemplating them repeatedly. Thus, Du Fu began his education exceptionally early. He composed poetry at 7 and had accumulated numerous works by 9. Du Shenyan's personality also influenced Du Fu. Du Shenyan was inherently arrogant, claiming his writings were unparalleled throughout history. Du Fu wasn't quite that extreme, but possessed equally overflowing confidence. He compared himself to Han Dynasty literary giants Bangu and Yang Sheng, even declaring bold statements like, "A true man's fame shall shake 10,000 years." Of course, this temperament wasn't just inherited, it was also a product of the times. Du Fu's youth coincided with the Kaiyuan Golden Age, when the Tang Empire was flourishing. Poets were all high-spirited, even deliberately flaunting their eccentricity. Take the literary leaders, for example. He Zizhang styled himself Madman of Siming, while the poet immortal Li Bai proclaimed, "I am the madman of Chu." Frontier poets like Wang Chengling, Wang Jihuan, and Gao Shi were also known for their wildness. Against such a backdrop, Du Fu's bold declarations were hardly surprising. High Tang poets also had a custom of extensive travels. Li Bai spent most of his life wandering through Sichuan, Hunan, Shandong, and Jiangsu, Zhejiang. Others like Wang Wei, Gao Shi, and Men Haoran were no different. Read 10,000 books, walk 10,000 miles. At 20, Du Fu embarked on his first journey, reaching present-day Nanjing to begin a 4-year tour of Wuye region. Immediately after, he wandered through Shandong and Hebei for another 5 years. These travels allowed Du Fu to appreciate landscapes, broaden horizons, make friends, and elevate his poetic craft to new levels. The masterpiece of this period is the five-character regulated verse, "Gazing at Mount Tai." Its grand vision and soaring spirit culminate in the famous couplet, "I must ascend the mountain's crest. It dwarfs all peaks under my feet," showcasing the poet's lofty ideals and expansive mind. What is Hai Tang spirit? This is Du Fu. With this poem, Du Fu formally entered the poetic arena. After returning from Shandong to Luoyang, Du Fu stayed put for 2 years without traveling. In 744 AD, Li Bai came to Luoyang. Their first meeting was exceptionally congenial. Starting that autumn, Du Fu traveled with Li Bai through Henan and Shandong for over a year, forging a lifelong friendship. Though Du Fu was decidedly more genuine about this bond. Over 10 of Du Fu's poems dedicated to Li Bai survive, including famous lines like, "While caps and coaches fill the royal town, you alone look frail and downcast." Yet Li Bai's poetry rarely mentions Du Fu. This makes sense. Li Bai was over a decade older, had served as Hanlin academician under Emperor Xuanzang, and was already world famous. Du Fu was just a newcomer to poetry circles, naturally more enthusiastic with his admiration for Li Bai. Though traveling brought joy, Du Fu never forgot his ideal to assist the emperor to surpass Yao and Shun and restore simple and honest customs. In 756 AD, the court announced an examination in Chang'an to recruit talents from across the land. Upon hearing the news, Du Fu bid farewell to Li Bai, packed his bags, and headed for Chang'an. That year, at 35, Du Fu entered the second stage of his life. In Chang'an, he fell from comfort into poverty, bidding farewell to youthful dreams and turning toward realism. Du Fu took the exam but failed, though all candidates failed. Prime Minister Li Linfu, who oversaw the exam, was jealous of talent and deliberately rejected everyone. He deceived Emperor Xuanzong, claiming this proved Tang's perfect governance had already recruited all worthy talents. Thus, among the exam takers, no usable talent remained. This path was blocked. Du Fu turned to powerful nobles, frequenting mansions like Prince Ruyang Lijun and Hanlin academician Zhang Ji, writing flattering poems hoping for promotion. He even tried currying favor with consort Yang's brother. How did Yang Guozhan view Du Fu's efforts? Actually, this was quite common at the time. Tang Dynasty had parallel systems, imperial examinations and recommendation-based appointments. The recommendation system meant high officials could bypass exams and directly appoint talents to government posts. This drove many humble scholars to seek noble patrons for career advancement. Even Du Fu's predecessors like Li Bai and Wang Wei flattered nobles. The reclusive Meng Haoran wrote poems for the chancellor, so Du Fu's actions weren't excessive. After years of hustling, an opportunity finally came. In 751 AD, Emperor Xuanzong planned 3 grand sacrifices. Du Fu learned early and submitted 3 rhapsodies called the 3 Great Sacrifices. This caught Emperor Xuanzong's attention. Li Linfu arranged another exam for Du Fu, held at the chancellor's office. During the test, Du Fu wrote furiously, surrounded by admiring scholars. This was the pinnacle moment of Du Fu's life. Even in old age, he cherished this memory, but the outcome disappointed. The court merely said, "Registered with authorities awaiting appointment," meaning your name is in the talent database. Wait for your post. Ultimately, Du Fu got only an unofficial role. Again, Li Linfu likely sabotaged it. To prove all talents already served the court, Li Linfu deliberately snubbed Du Fu, denying him an official position. Flattering nobles didn't work. Even imperial recognition failed. Du Fu reached rock bottom, despair, like a leaky roof battered by night rain. During this time, with his father's death and loss of support, Du Fu's circumstances plummeted, and his life gradually fell from comfort into poverty. Later, he could only sell his better clothes and, like the common people, wore short garments. In famine years, he had to mix with the commoners to snatch the government's cheap rice. Soon, that spirited poet became gaunt and haggard. His friends could barely recognize him. Due to the hardship of life, Du Fu sent his wife and children to Fengshan, which is today's Pucheng County and Shanxi, and the county magistrate was a relative of his wife and could help take care of them. Du Fu stayed alone in Chang'an, continuing to wait for an opportunity. This was a turning point in Du Fu's life and also in his creative career. Previously, Du Fu's works were uplifting and romantic, but with the decline in his social status, he became closer to the common people. He discovered that beneath the facade of prosperity, corrupt officials were in power, corruption was rampant, and the common people not only had to bear heavy taxes, but also serve in labor and military duties, making life unbearable. Du Fu's poetic style began to change significantly. In his later years in Chang'an, his creative content focused mainly on 2 aspects: lamenting his personal circumstances and reflecting the people's hardships. But first, lamenting personal circumstances. Du Fu spent years running to the doors of the powerful but gained nothing. In contrast, those playboys, with no real talent or learning, could rise rapidly to high positions. Truly, the dandies don't starve, while scholars often ruin themselves. He saw that raw silk had to be dyed into colorful silk to be sold. He couldn't help but sigh. Must people change their nature to gain social recognition? In helplessness, Du Fu uttered the angry words, "What use is Confucianism to me?" Now, to discuss reflecting the people's hardships. In the later years of Emperor Xuanzang's reign, he encouraged generals to expand territories and wage wars. For this, the authorities drafted men everywhere to send to the front lines, leaving many places with only women tilling the fields. One day, Du Fu passed by Xianyang Bridge west of Chang'an and encountered an army marching to the battlefield, with the bridge sides crowded with the parents, wives, and children of new soldiers. Knowing their loved ones faced near certain death, they couldn't help but clutch their clothes, stomp their feet, and wail loudly. Du Fu thus wrote the timeless masterpiece, Song of the War Chariots, in which he depicts the scene of loved ones parting and then points out that the people's suffering is caused by the emperor's grandiose ambitions and excessive demands. I, too, cut D. The poet angrily questioned, "Have you not seen, at King Hai's head, bones of the dead unburied since ancient times? New ghosts wail in grievance, old ghosts weep. On rainy, cloudy days their cries chirp incessantly. This means those wandering ghosts who died on the battlefield are crying in the gloomy rain."
Ruler, do you hear that?
In the 14th year of Tianbao, that is 755 AD, the court finally remembered Du Fu, who had been waiting for assignment, and appointed him as a military staff officer. Although it was a low-ranking position at the 8th rank, it provided imperial rations, and Du Fu was still happy. He went to Fengshan to bring his family back to Chang'an, and what he saw and heard along the way prompted Du Fu to write a long poem. Reflections on My Way from the Capital to Fenjian County, 500 words. This poem achieved high artistic and intellectual accomplishments worth discussing in detail. The poem is divided into 3 parts. The first part has 16 lines and 160 words, expressing personal feelings. Du Fu lamented that he was over 40, still a commoner with no achievements. Yet despite this, he still worried about the common people all year round, sighing with inner heat, meaning he was anxious all day about the livelihood of the common folk, with intense inner turmoil. The second part, 19 lines and 190 words, describes what he saw and felt on the journey. It was the end of the year, with biting cold winds so severe that the frost made his belt snap, and his fingers were too stiff to tie a knot. The frost broke his belt, and when he tried to tie a knot, he found his fingers were too stiff to bend. With such cold weather, how can poor families endure it? Yet not far away on Mount Li, the emperor and his nobles were feasting lavishly in the warm Huaqing Palace, indulging in pleasure. Truly, behind red doors, meat and wine go to waste, while on the road lie frozen bones. The third part, 15 lines and 150 words. Returning to personal experiences, the poet braved wind and dew on the road, finally reuniting with his family. But upon entering, he heard wailing. His youngest child had starved to death. As soon as he entered, he heard his wife wailing loudly. It turned out the youngest child had starved to death. The poet wept bitterly. Neighbors heard and sobbed. The poet then thought, since he came from an official family and didn't have to pay taxes, yet his child starved, how much worse must ordinary people suffer? He dared not think further. His worries were as high as Mount Zhengnan, vast and unending. My worries and pain are as high as Mount Zhengnan, boundless, impossible to contain. The poem stops abruptly here. This single quote, Reflections, 500 words, is hailed as a masterpiece among Tang Dynasty 5-character ancient poems, its length exceeding most similar works. Because the events and emotions the poet wanted to express were very rich, thus expanding the capacity of the traditional genre of 5-character ancient poetry. Writing technique. The poem progresses layer by layer with many twists, contrasting cold with warmth, juxtaposing luxury with poverty, making it highly infectious. Simultaneously, Du Fu captured the severe social crisis on the eve of the An Lushan Rebellion, expressing deep concern. His insight was remarkably acute, showcasing the depth of a great poet. Sure enough, a catastrophe quietly descended, ushering Du Fu into the third stage of his life, the refugee period, during which he pushed realist poetry to its peak. In the 14th year of Tianbao, that is, 755 AD, in November, An Lushan, military governor of Pinglu, Fanyang, and Heddong, reveled with Shi Siming, known as the An Lushan Rebellion. The rebels swept through Hebei in a month, captured Luoyang, and a year later breached Tong Pass to occupy Chang'an. Emperor Xuanzang fled in panic. The seemingly mighty Tang Empire suddenly teetered on collapse. When rebellion erupted, Du Fu had just reunited with family in Finjin. As birds scatter when nests fall, the refugee tide swept his family into turmoil. Chaos reigned for a long while. Du Fu finally settled his family in Fuzhou, today's Fuxian, Shaanxi, then journeyed alone to Lingwu in Ningxia. Recently, Emperor Suzong Li Heng had ascended in Lingwu, while Emperor Xuanzang in Sichuan became retired emperor. Though only a low-ranking military officer, Du Fu remained fiercely loyal to the court and resolved to join Suzong. Unfortunately, rebels captured him en route and took him to Chang'an. Luckily, Du Fu dressed plainly and looked like a wretched old man, so rebels dismissed him as insignificant, keeping lax guard. Thus, during his half-year in occupied Chang'an, he moved relatively freely, witnessing horrors which he recorded in poetry. The rebels focused on targeting nobles and imperial relatives. Wealthy homes in Chang'an were looted. Imperial relatives were beheaded.
Du Fu witnessed rebels publicly execute Princess Huo Guo, even disemboweling princes and consorts with exceptional cruelty.
Du Fu recorded such encounters in his ancient verse, Lament for the Imperial Prince. Once, crossing a street, Du Fu saw someone weeping roadside. Ragged clothes, but a beautiful jade pendant. Clearly an imperial descendant. Du Fu urgently pulled him aside. Rebels hunt princes. How dare you wander? The prince wept. I hid in thorn bushes for 100+ days, covered in wounds, couldn't endure anymore, came out to sell myself into slavery. Du Fu stood frozen but helpless, only advising him to remove the jade to hide his identity before hurrying away. In truth, Du Fu's own situation wasn't much better. It was winter, bitterly cold. Lacking clothing and food, he endured hunger in a drafty house, day and night longing for the imperial army to recapture Chang'an. Yet only bad news arrived. In winter 756 AD, Tang forces attacked Chang'an and suffered a crushing defeat. Hearing this, Du Fu wept, lamenting, under clear sky and wilderness no battle sounds. 40,000 loyal troops died in one day, pinning hopes on spring. Chang'an remained shrouded in death's shadow. Moved by the scene, Du Fu wrote the 5-character regulated verse, Spring View. A nation shattered, hills and streams remain. Spring in the city, grass and trees grow deep. Moved by times, flowers splash with tears. Hating parting, birds startle the heart. Beacon fires 3 months running. A letter from home worth 10,000 gold. White hair scratched grows thinner, soon too thin to hold a hairpin. When would such days end? Fortunately, An Lushan was assassinated, rebels turned to infighting, and surveillance of Du Fu slackened. In April 757 AD, second year of Zihide, Du Fu seized the chance to flee the occupied zone, reaching Fengshan in Shaanxi, where Emperor Suzong was based. After the rebellion erupted, high officials died or fled. Those captured, like General Geshu Han, poets Wang Wei and Chu Guangxi, and Emperor Xuanzang's favorites Zhang Ji and Zhang Jun, took false posts to survive. Only Du Fu, this minor official, remained unyielding, wholly devoted to the court and emperor. This deeply moved Emperor Suzong, who personally received him and appointed him Reminder of the Left. The Reminder of the Left was 8th rank upper, slightly higher than military officer, but carried greater responsibility. Du Fu stayed near the emperor, offering advice and opinions at any time. He essentially became an imperial confidant with promising prospects. But soon, Emperor Suzong dismissed Chancellor Fan Guan. Du Fu deemed this improper, submitted a defense with fiery language that angered Suzong, and was demoted to Huazhou military administrator. Serving barely over a month as reminder, he was expelled, showing how ill-suited he was for officialdom. Actually, for his writing, this proved beneficial. Staying near the emperor, distant from the people, he'd have been merely a court poet. But as a minor official in Huazhou, modern Huajian, Shanxi, experiencing people's hardships, he could become the sage of poetry. Du Fu took office in summer, visited newly recovered Luang in winter to see relatives, and returned to Huazhou next spring. Along this journey, witnessing war's devastation on ordinary people, he produced two sets of realist masterpieces, Three Officials and Three Partings. The three officials refer to the official at Shinan, the official at Stone Moat, and the official at Tong Pass. Here we'll focus on the official at Stone Moat. Late at night, the poet lodged in Stone Moat village. Just after lying down, he heard officials knocking. The old man, knowing they came to conscript men for the front, jumped over the wall and fled. The old woman opened the door to deal with them. How furiously the officer howled. How bitterly the old woman wept. The officer's arrogance and the old woman's humility appear vividly before our eyes. The old woman said her family had 3 sons, all serving in the army. The second son had recently died in battle. Now only her daughter-in-law, grandchildren, and this old woman remained. If you don't despise me, take me to cook in the camp. The single partings refer to parting of the newlyweds, parting of the aged, and parting without family. I'll focus on parting without family. It tells of a soldier who survived against all odds, returned home, reclaimed wasteland alone, and barely survived in chaotic times. Yet even this couldn't escape officials' conscription. He was sent back to the front. Before leaving, he remembered his mother's remains had lain in a ditch for 5 years, never properly buried. He couldn't help but cry. Without home, what farewells can there be? How can common people survive? Others going to war have families to bid farewell. I have no home to part from. In this world, how can ordinary people live? Three Officials and Three Partings use straightforward realism, yet these poems are milestones in Chinese classical literature. Before Du Fu, poets focused on landscapes, countrysides, emperors, and scholars, rarely ordinary people's lives and emotions. But from his later Chang'an years, Du Fu dedicated himself to portraying commoners' fates and sufferings, from Song of War Chariots and Reflections, 500 words, to the fully matured Three Officials and Three Partings. He thus elevated the realist tradition, criticizing social ills and sympathizing with people, to its peak. For this reason, Du Fu's works are hailed as poetic history, writing history through poetry. By now, Du Fu was 48. By contemporary reckoning, entering old age. This brings us to the fourth stage, late life, where Du Fu's poetic artistry reached its zenith. Du Fu's late years divide into 2 periods, Chengdu Thatched Cottage and Kuizhou. First, Chengdu Thatched Cottage period, in 759 AD, second year of Qianyan. Famine struck Shanxi. Huazhou faced severe food shortages. His meager salary couldn't support his family, so Du Fu resigned his post and wandered with them seeking food. He arrived in Sichuan at the end of that year. Chengdu, Sichuan is known as the land of abundance, with a pleasant climate, ample food, and easily defensible terrain. Du Fu's family first settled at Caotong Temple in Chengdu's western suburbs. 3 months later, he found a wasteland by the Huanhui stream, cleared it for farming, and built a thatched cottage. This is the Du Fu thatched cottage, still located in the western suburbs today. Du Fu's days in Chengdu were relatively stable, thanks to external conditions. His old friend, the great poet Gao Shi, served as prefect in nearby Pengzhou and often supported him. Later, another old friend, Yan Wu, became Chengdu's administrative chief, providing even more care for Du Fu. Moreover, due to Yan Wu's influence, local officials respected Du Fu deeply. He no longer faced cold stares from the powerful like in Chang'an. The stable life gave him ample time and energy for creation. In 5 years in Chengdu, he wrote over 400 poems, making up 1/3 of his surviving works, showing his creativity remained strong. More importantly, Du Fu's creations during this period expanded the themes and depth of classical poetry. The authors believed Chinese classical poetry had narrow themes, like officials writing about court life or ceremonies, often by imperial order, with rigid forms and stale content. Ordinary poets just reminisced about the past, rarely focusing on daily life. But with Du Fu, details like farming, gardening, drinking, and chess, ignored by previous poets, became poetic material. Here are some familiar examples. The cottage near a stream often had birds, so Du Fu wrote, "Swallows come and go freely in the hall. Gulls on water are intimate and close." And "Two yellow orioles sing in green willows. A line of white egrets ascends the blue sky. On a spring night, rain pattered down. Thus came the lines, 'Good rain knows the season, arriving in spring, stealthily with wind at night, moistening all silently.' Listening to music, Du Fu wrote, 'This music should only exist in heaven. How often can mortals hear it?' A guest visited. Du Fu happily said, 'The flower path hasn't been swept for guests. The rustic gate opens just for you today.' He went to the fields to pick vegetables and cooked personally. This is the so-called, 'I hoe the vegetable patch myself. I pick a little for loved ones. Even when the north wind howled and blew the thatch off the roof, I.
Such an embarrassing incident.
Du Fu turned it into poetry, ending with an appeal. How can I get thousands of spacious houses to shelter all the poor scholars under heaven and make them smile? It's just a pity that Du Fu's thatched cottage years were about to end. In 763 AD, the Tang army achieved a decisive victory. 2 years after the An Lushan Rebellion ended, Yan Wu and Gao Shi died successively. Du Fu lost his patrons. In summer 766, he moved with his family to Guizhou in Sichuan, entering the Guizhou period. Du Fu resided in Guizhou. In nearly 2 years, he wrote over 430 poems, exceeding his Chengdu thatched cottage period output. Then over 55 years old, considered elderly in ancient times, his mindset aged, reflected in poetry, preferring historical nostalgia and memories. With an increasingly somber style, Guizhou had numerous historic sites. Du Fu visited them all, composing poems about 5 historical figures, including Zhuge Liang and Wang Zhaozhen. When, notably, these were all tragic figures. Zhuge Liang strove to restore the Han Dynasty but died at Wuzhong Plains. Wang Zhaojun possessed legendary beauty, yet married into the Xiannu as a sacrifice to marriage-alliance policies. Clearly, Du Fu used these ancient figures to express his own frustration at unrecognized talent. Beyond ancient figures, she selected 8 eminent Tang scholars, writing 1 poem each, including Kaiyuan-era Chancellor Zhang Jiwing, calligrapher Li Yang, and An Lushan Rebellion heroes, such as Li Guangbi, brilliant and meritorious yet meeting tragic ends, dismissed or killed by treacherous officials. Du Fu sought to reveal Tang's decline causes, but 8 Autumn Meditations best represents his late creative peak. This is a series of 8 7-character regulated poems. In the first 3, the poet notes the season. Jade dew withers maple groves, chilly late autumn, sunset. Gazing at the Big Dipper, hearing Gibbon's mournful cries along 3 gorges, he recalls distant Chang'an. Most classmates from youth rose high. At 5 mounds they ride plump horses in light furs. Most friends who sought office with me in Chang'an succeeded, riding tall horses triumphantly. But what of it? From the 4th poem, the poet's tone grows heavier. Since the An Lushan Rebellion, nobles scattered, until mansions of princes have new lords. Civil military robes differ from before. Grand estates changed hands, court officials were replaced. then viewing Chang'an's scenic sights. Quanzheng Pool and Furong Garden, once pavilion-filled, visitors swarmed, where Emperor Xuanzong often strolled with consort Yang, now lay desolate. Reaching here, it's the eighth and final poem.
The poet shifts focus back to Guizhou. In this remote place, recalling the irretrievable glory of Haitang, he feels overwhelming emotions.
Only by bowing his white head in sorrow and reciting poetry can he commemorate. The uniqueness of 8 autumn meditations lies spatially, moving from Guizhou to Chainan, temporally from Zhenguan Golden Age to Kaiwan Prosperity, then to An Lushan Rebellion. The poet integrates landscapes, historical allusions, national fortunes, and personal experiences. Its visionary breadth and profound thought stand unique in Chinese poetic history. After finishing 8 autumn meditations, Du Fu's life neared its end. His health deteriorated, hair whitened, teeth fell out, he grew deaf and blind. With no support in Guizhou, his last 2 years were spent wandering. In winter, 770 AD, aboard a small boat from Tanzhou to Yuezhou in Hunan, Du Fu passed away at 59. Finally, let's discuss Du Fu's influence on later generations. Du Fu wasn't famous during his lifetime. Major poetry anthologies like Heroes of Rivers and Peaks and mid-revival talents excluded his works.
But mid-Tang's 2 major schools, Yuanzhen-Baijui and Hanyu-Mangzhao, highly revered Du Fu, valuing his poems' reflection of people's hardships.
This relates to Baijui and Hanyu's own values and political leanings. Promoted by literary leaders, Du Fu's fame grew. By late Tang, he equaled Li Bai as Li Du. Song Dynasty scholars esteemed him higher. Guan Tingjin said, "Not a single word in his poems lacks classical origin."
Qin Guan summarized his artistry as synthesizing all achievements. Yang Wanli called him sage of poetry.
Du Fu's Chengdu thatched cottage works were especially sought after. Facing Tang poetry's insurmountable peak, some poets needed new paths. But where to find them? Du Fu's life-oriented works provided the direction.
Song poetry built on Du Fu's foundation, delving into life's details and pushing them to extremes.
Du Fu's poetic innovations were equally celebrated by posterity. His Juju quatrains and Lushi reached pinnacles, especially his 5-character extended regulated verse, Wu Pai, unmatched through history. 5-character extended regulated verse, abbreviated Wu Pai, expands the 5-character regulated verse form. Its extended length requires strict parallelism and rhyme, multiplying the difficulty. Du Shenyan, Du Fu's grandfather, was renowned for Wu Pai. Du Fu elevated it to unreachable heights. His 5-character extended regulated verses, Wu Pai, are not just numerous, but grand in scale and exquisitely structured. The most astonishing one spans 100 lines with a single rhyme throughout, composed in one breath. Leaving later poets with nothing but awe. At life's end, Du Fu feverishly wrote a 36-line Wu Pai for relatives in Hunan, his final poem. In it, he summarized his tumultuous life, expressing ultimate sorrow for his wandering fate and China's ravaged landscapes. Contemporary renowned poet Huang Cancran, reflecting on this poem, said, "Heaven endowed his unremarkable body with mountains, rivers, chaos, and love, letting him alone embody an era." Indeed, Du Fu alone embodied an era. His poetry transcends time, becoming our nation's most precious cultural memory. Well, that concludes Du Fu's biography. Reading notes are below the audio. We'll see you next time.